Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Andrew McCormick. We're going to discuss a topic today that I find personally fascinating, procrastination. Now, maybe I find this so interesting because I am what you might consider on the outside to be a procrastinator myself. A claim that I vehemently deny, by the way. One of these days, I'm going to write a big old honkin' rant on social media about how I'm really not a procrastinator. I'll get to that someday. But anyway, I think maybe I find procrastination so interesting because I think about how it partners with some cause and effects. You know, when we look at personality types and maybe even if it's a prerequisite to people that are creative. Questions like, is it true that creative types are more messy? I would say yes. Are creative types more likely to blah, 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 blah? You know, I think that that's a fun little game that we play oftentimes. So I stumbled across this New York Times article a few months ago about the upsides of procrastination. To summarize, the author puts forward that procrastination has gotten a lot of bad PR lately, and that it may actually be a huge boon to creativity. In fact, it may be one of those pesky prerequisites to creativity. You know, to me, that makes so much sense. To other artists, though, and teachers, I know that this idea is going to be flat out insulting. So let's dig into this a little bit. Number one, I think we need to talk about semantics. You know, what does procrastination in the art room really look like, and what does it really mean? We may have to try to define it here. Number two, are there students and artists that actually benefit from procrastination? Can we say that it's not a hindrance and in fact actually a boost to their creativity and even production? And then number three, would we ever go so far as teachers to say that we should build in ways that our students can procrastinate in our classroom? That one's going to be a little bit of a stretch. So first, let's talk semantics. Like I said, I think that procrastination gets kind of a bad rap, and I think I've gotten a bad rap for being one of those people also. And, while I want to avoid turning this episode into me rationalizing why I always turn my stuff in on the last minute, I know that my own issues with procrastination and creativity are going to resonate with a lot of people out there. I choose not to even use the word procrastination if I can. Instead, I prefer prioritizing, compartmentalizing, fermentation. And maybe I'm rationalizing it here, but I think procrastinators pride themselves on always getting things done and still doing them well. I don't wait to the last minute on purpose. I'd love to be the type of person who gets things done early and then I revamp them, rework them, edit them, but I'm more of a front loader. While it may look like, procrastinators are putting things off, we're thinking the entire time. By the time a work of art or writing gets done, it's been mulled over inside of our heads a million times. And this is why I liken it to fermentation. Like any fermenters out there, that eventually things are going to bubble over or even pop. And eventually that mulling and thinking, it reaches a critical mass, and it just has to come out. Now, maybe this is either because of the real parameters of a deadline or lack of creative brain space, but eventually the work comes out. And I would say it's better for that sort of fermentation process. Now, to be clear, simply avoiding work is not procrastination. This is why I think procrastination gets a bad rap. It's not doing nothing. Creative practice, creative procrastination in your practice, it's like an internal building. It's gathering momentum. I'd liken it more to juggling or moving pots around on the stove. It's compartmentalizing. So procrastinator, no. Now, do I overextend myself and say yes to everything and then run out of time? Yes, I'm guilty of that for sure. Perhaps that's the real culprit of procrastination. Maybe this needs to be another conversation or question. Are creative types likely to overpromise and underdeliver? Probably guilty of that one. We all know tons of procrastinators out there, whether you're one or you have a colleague or definitely your students who kind of seem like they do nothing for stretches on end and then at the last minute come up with some amazing work. I think what, doing nothing looks like, it's actually a part of that person's process. There's just different ways to get to the same place. Some people out there are going to be concrete sequentials, every day a little bit at a time. Others of us are more abstract random. The big challenge for art teachers is being able to work with all types of learners, those that procrastinate and those that don't. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that there's different levels of understanding of procrastination. Literally doing nothing, it's not procrastination, it's avoidance. Procrastination is thinking. Maybe it's doodles, notes, checking out images online, doing research. Maybe it's working on a new project despite the fact that a student already has 3 unfinished projects out there. As long as eventually, we've got to have some deadlines out there to get students to turn in quality work, who really cares how long something takes or what the process looks like? I'd even go so far as to say that if we forced naturally slower workers, those daydreamers and procrastinators out there, to work more linear and more methodical, number one, that won't work. People just don't fly against their nature, right? And number two, even if somehow it did take hold, I think that we would sap out some of the energy and juice of that student's work that made it so interesting and unique. The procrastination was an important part of their process. Okay, so finally, we're going to go out on a limb here. If I've done my job and I've kind of convinced you that procrastination isn't all that bad, it's not as bad as it's cracked up to be, I wonder if we could agree that procrastination is actually a part of being creative, that we might encourage it in our classroom. Now, I know the naysayers out there will say, but what about the real world? What about deadlines? Okay, first off, whenever teachers, adults, talk to students about the quote-unquote real world, I find this totally insensitive. It's as if the trials and tribulations of being a teenager don't compare to being an adult. I don't envy the real lives and real struggles that my students are facing. Okay, grumpy Andy Rooney time over here. Secondly, the real world, quote-unquote real world, is filled with procrastination. If I procrastinated on paying my taxes until midnight the night that they're due, I'm pretty sure that the IRS would still accept my money. If I turned in my lesson plans at the very last minute that I was given by my administrator, as long as they're done and done well, what's the problem? If we start to see quality suffer due to always hitting the deadlines right at the very last minute, then perhaps we need to take a hard look at our practice. But if the quality's good, so here's what I'd suggest. If you wanted to have some wiggle room in your classroom and allow for some procrastination, accept all artwork at any time for full credit. Okay? Let that sink in for a second. You still have deadlines, however, and this is when you would like for all your students to have their work turned in by, but we all know that students learn and work at different speeds. These project-specific deadlines, these sort of like checkpoints, are soft. They can move a little bit. That's fine. The one big hard deadline for the entire term, semester, quarter, trimester, whatever, is the end of that term. Don't penalize students with participation grades for taking a bit longer. Don't dock their points if it's a week late, because basically you're kind of telling them it's not even worth it. If you dock their points 50%, it's like getting an F. You're not going to encourage students to actually get anything done that way. If the work never gets done, right, you got to do what you got to do. But I think that the idea of soft rolling deadlines actually teaches students to better compartmentalize and manage their time than having, and still having quality work than, this weird, severe, artificial deadline that's put in place by us, the teacher. Okay, grumpy rant over. As this episode digs into questioning, whether procrastination's all bad and if actually it's a prerequisite to creativity, if you want to explore other possible prerequisites to creativity, definitely check out the Art of Education's course, Crisis in Creativity. I personally love teaching the creativity class as I see firsthand some of the experiments that fellow teachers try on to boost their own creativity, whether it's an artist date or morning papers. They're always really interesting to see the different takes that people have to rekindling their own creative fires. Definitely check out this course if rekindling your creativity is something that you might need right before the school year starts up again. So head on over to theartofed.com and check out this course and all the other great courses under the Courses tab. So now, without further pushing off the inevitable, I better bring on the antithesis of procrastination, Tim Bogatz. All right, so Tim, I get the sense that you hate procrastination about as much as I hate that really crafty craft stuff out there. So why are you hating on procrastination so much?
Man, all right. So first of all, we talked about crafts last week and hating on those, and now I have to hate on procrastination. I feel like you're trying to make me look bad here.
Well, it doesn't take a whole lot to do that. Oh,
wow.
Okay.
Wow. All right. Starting off strong tonight. Okay. So with procrastination, I don't know if there's one thing I can put my finger on, but just the thing I hate more than anything as a teacher is just apathy from my students. And for me, too often procrastination looks like apathy. And it's tough to kind of walk that line, try and decide, like, are kids really thinking about something, or are they just stalling and delaying and trying to get out of work? And for me, with high schoolers, I really think most of the time they're just trying to get out of the work. So that's where my frustration comes from.
I have a feeling when we were thinking about this episode, I kind of knew this might come down to kind of word choice and how we define procrastination. Because I agree, like apathy is really, really frustrating. And I know we've all had students where they do nothing and they actually probably do more work doing nothing than it would have been to just finish your project. Like you're spending so much mental energy looking like you're busy and doing nothing as what, like a sign of protest or something? Like, just do the work. So I agree. Apathy, super, super frustrating. But, to me, I think about procrastination as like fermentation. It's sitting, it's stewing. I'm thinking about it. I'm mulling it over, and I'm kind of waiting until that moment where like the pot boils over and like I've got to act. I mean, do you see that a lot out of your students, or am I just like wishfully thinking that kids actually like act and work that way?
Yeah, I don't know. In my experience, you're romanticizing things a little bit. Because I don't know, like, let me ask you this. Like, what does creativity or what does procrastination look like to you? Like, is it just sitting around? Is it working in your sketchbook? Is it, multitasking where you're sitting on your phone for a while until some kind of idea hits you? Like, what does it look like for you?
Oh, you with all these good questions. I'm the interviewer here, sir. Well, okay. I think looking at your phone, right, and talking to your friends and that to me is avoidance. And I think avoidance is like, that's not procrastination. Procrastination to me is like, well, okay, it's deep. You're gonna box me into a corner here. It's deep thinking. There's a lot of thinking, and it's like, even though I'm not working on artwork, I'm thinking about artwork. I'm collecting images or resources or ideas. I'm jotting down ideas. I don't do a lot of sketching, but I do more like kind of writing and scheming out. And then it's like it all kind of comes together in this like moment of fury where it gets done in like 3 hours. Now, someone could say like, well, you could have done that like a week ago over the span of 3 days, where it's like 45 minutes here and 45 minutes here and 45 minutes here. Instead, you kind of waited until the last minute. But during that time while I was waiting, I was like in my mind gaining momentum and speed. And I kind of think of it as like critical mass, like it's getting,
you're just constantly building towards something.
Right. And it has to happen. And I think about this phrase that, what is it? In necessity is the mother of all invention, right? Like at some point, like you have to act and it comes out. And I've noticed with my own work, and maybe you can speak about if this happens with student work, or again, if I'm just romanticizing, in the procrastination, in the waiting, in the accumulating of critical mass, I think sometimes the work actually gets better than if it would have gotten done last Thursday when like you kind of thought it was going to get done. Does that ever happen with you and your students?
Yeah, I think it does with some students, but the problem I have, I think, with, sort of building toward that critical mass is that the classroom is not necessarily a good environment for that. Like there are just so many distractions that get you out of that creative zone or out of that flow. And it's really tough for kids to kind of stay focused on that work and stay thinking about that work. Along with the, 45, 50-minute class period you have, it makes it really difficult for kids to kind of, stay in that flow. But at the same time, there are people that work like that and do better work when they work like that. Like, I'm not one of those people. I'm one of those people that kind of sits down and just puts in the hours, grinds it out, and that's the way I go with things. But, a lot of my students are more towards your end of the spectrum where they wait and wait and wait, and then all of a sudden it just sort of explodes onto the paper and they pull an all-nighter and come in with some amazing work. And,
Right.
I'm not in position to judge like, oh, you shouldn't have worked like that, because some people just do. But again, like I said, I don't know that the classroom environment is the best place to kind of ferment those ideas.
So a couple things on that. I totally agree that that's probably a difference in some students' working style. Artists who are like, every day I work on my paintings 9 to 4 and then I'm done. Whereas me, it's like, well, I won't work on artwork for 2 or 3 days. And then like all of a sudden on a Friday night, I'll spend 3 hours just like doing it, just out of the blue. So there's to some degree that's true. But then I also think your point that like the classroom structure, the 50 minutes, 45 minutes doesn't lend itself to that sort of fermentation and building. I totally agree with you, but I would take it one step further. I would actually say that the school structure of most schools in America don't lend themselves to anything productive, let alone creative work or learning. Like if you were to ask any like quality teachers or administrators, like, hey, design the best day that you could for your students to actually learn something. No one would come up with the structure of, hey, every 50 minutes, they're going to jump from one random subject to another random subject. It just makes no sense. And, as I've adopted a more choice approach, I think about like, does my classroom feel like a real like sort of studio of artists working? And sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes the answer is no. And when it's yes, it's like, it's despite the fact that we have to leave every 48 minutes with bells in this sort of industrial system. But, I'm kind of off on a tangent here. When we think about, mechanization of school and 48 minutes and bells, I think sometimes about compartmentalization and prioritizing. Like our students are busy, right? They've got track practice and choir practice and other homework. Do you think that compartmentalization, prioritizing kind of goes hand in hand with procrastination, or am I just rationalizing my own sort of work habits here?
No, I think it can go together pretty well. And I think that's an important lesson for kids, is to be able to figure out how to fit all of that stuff in. Like, it's not like you're going to grow up and be an artist and just be able to sit around and think all day and then paint when you're feeling super creative. Like you have a lot of other stuff that you need to do. And so I think it's good for kids to be able to, at least in their mind, kind of go back and forth between things. Like, maybe they are, continuing to think about your project while they're sitting in social studies. And at the same time, maybe that history that they're thinking about gives them some kind of an influence or some kind of an idea when you're in that class, when they're in art class. And so I think, part of it is figuring out how all of those ideas and how all those different responsibilities fit together, and how to create good work, in spite of having to do all of that stuff. And so, and maybe that takes the form of procrastination sometimes. Maybe it's multitasking other times, but I do think kids need to kind of think about where their ideas are going and kind of the direction of their thinking.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, like school is kind of like a microcosm of like quote unquote adult living. And I think that's one of the things that we don't often tell our students when they're feeling stressed and like, there's so many things. I'm like, part of the purpose of school is not just so that you can remember who the 23rd president is or Pythagorean theorem or like how to mix brown paint. It's like so that you can like become like a productive citizen and know what it's like to have to do the dishes, mow the lawn, pick up your kids, and also like make artwork at the same time, right? So
yeah.
One of the things that you kind of mentioned is like multitasking as a strategy for students to deal with this. I want to maybe I want to box you into a corner here a little
Okay.
bit, sir. You wrote an article a while ago on the Art of Ed about how it's a good idea to have students making 3 or 4 different projects at a time. Am I
Right.
kind of getting the gist of that right?
Yeah, we like to have 3 projects going at a time. One of them teacher assigned, one student choice, and one sort of sketchbook assignment or sort of ancillary extra assignment. But yeah.
Okay. Is that in itself, isn't that sort of, boy, how do I say this? Is that a way to kind of build procrastination into the day where it's like, if you're not feeling it on this painting, remember you still have this project that you could work on? Because let's face it, we all need those times away from a certain project so that we don't like totally burn out.
Right.
But it's better than like, well, I'm going to sit here and think and look at my phone and talk to my friends. So is that kind of why you've done that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because you're making me think that now, that idea of 3 projects at once is sort of giving kids the tools they need to procrastinate on stuff. But yeah, the original idea is just to kind of avoid that apathy or, get away from kids doing, all the things they do to avoid work. And so I think, it's kind of a balance for them as a student and for me as a teacher. There's benefits for both of us because, like you said, a lot of times, especially when we're doing this really sort of work intensive projects, you can't just knock that out day after day after day. Sometimes you need a mental break. Sometimes you need a physical break from that kind of thing. So it's good for kids to have options. And then,
Right.
For me as a teacher, it works really well to help kids find something that they need to be doing where, if they're tired of this or they don't have any workout, I can say, oh, hey, what about that choice painting that you're doing? Like, this would be a good time to put some work in on that. Or, hey, what about this sketchbook assignment? You have 3 of them that you need to do. Like, just knock one out right now. Right. And it's really easy for me to give them a very concrete, very direct thing that they can be doing. So we're kind of avoiding that downtime when they're in class.
Okay, I can see some cracks in your armor starting to show up.
Okay.
I can see you starting to soften on procrastination, and it's not such a bad word. So I'm going to hit you with this.
Okay.
There's been tons of like research and writing and articles and blog posts out there about, the nature of creative people is to procrastinate, is to overcommit and get, overextended and do everything at the last minute, but yet still do it well. Mm-hmm. There's even people who say that procrastination is like an integral part of the creative process, like that creativity needs room to breathe and that word ferment, like I brought up. Do you think that those people are just like completely full of crap?
No, not at all. I think that, I think that they're onto something. I think that it's worth thinking about. And I think it goes back to kind of what we talked about a little bit ago about everybody having kind of a different working style. Like, you obviously in your classroom appreciate those kids who are procrastinating because you see that as sort of a creative measure. And for me, I get frustrated with that, but at the same time, I need to be open to it because, like I said, there are some kids who wait, and then come back with just this amazing work that was done in a day and a half. So, there are all different styles, and I can totally buy that creativity, can require procrastination. But at the same time, it also goes back to what we said about the school day not being conducive to that.
Yeah.
Like, we can't just have our kids sitting and thinking and sitting and waiting and sitting and procrastinating for 50 minutes every day because nothing is going to get done. And so, whether you consider that, playing the school game or whatever you want to call it, in my classroom, I can't let kids sit and do nothing for that long.
Right. Well, you're kind of opening up a whole nother side conversation here, which is like, when is it okay to allow students to fail? And, is that something that they're learning? You talked about the soft skill that students learn in art, maybe better than any other class, which is like time management. And how do we shuffle all this stuff around? Then we could get into the whole like, well, if you want to sit there for 2 weeks and do nothing, like there's going to be consequences to that. But I think that's a whole nother topic about when is it okay to allow students to like struggle and when do we jump in and intervene.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get you out on here on this. As you've kind of been thinking about this, do you have any kind of parting words, either in the affirmative or negative, on procrastination? I mean, do we have to stamp it out, or is it something that we can, kind of work with, but find our own little kind of happy medium?
Yeah, well, I think, like we say every second or third episode, it's all about finding that balance. Like, it really is. And so I think, on one hand, we need to allow our creative kids, our procrastinating kids, some time to do that. Like, we need to be understanding as teachers for those kids who are procrastinators or who are the creative type that need a little more time to think. But at the same time, as teachers, we have a responsibility to not let our kids fail. Like, we need to not let them sit day after day after day. You need to find something for them that's either moving them forward in the creative process, something concrete that they can work toward. Okay, even if it is just brainstorming, thinking, writing ideas, sketching, whatever. Like, they need to be productive in that time, even if they aren't working on that project. And so I think, like I said, we need to allow for a little bit of procrastination, but at the same time, we do have a responsibility to make sure our kids are making work and are doing the things that they need to do to be successful.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, thanks for coming on. I've got to type up these show notes, but I'm probably going to do it at midnight on the day that they're due. So I'm going to get to it right before this episode goes live, okay?
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Tim. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks to Tim for sharing his thoughts on the debatable importance of procrastination and how important it is on being creative. I think while we have different personal stances on procrastination, it was really great to hear Tim reaffirm my belief that some people just work this way, that procrastination and that fermentation is just part of their creative process, and that finding balance is really the key. Keep them moving, keep your students moving, but also allow for some of that downtime, that daydreaming, that fermentation, to really encourage creative solutions. Now, if we can just figure out a way to revolutionize the way that we structure the typical school day in America to allow for more creative and innovative environments and solutions, that'd be great. I think Tim and I are going to get right on that. I mean, eventually. Yeah, I'll get to it eventually. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. If you've been enjoying what Tim and I have been doing with this show, do yourself a favor and head on over to artedradio.com and click the I'm a Fan button, and you'll be added to our email list to receive additional updates on cool guests, upcoming podcast episodes, and even some possible AOE discounts for our great fans out there. And of course, head on over to iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you listen to the podcast on, and subscribe and give us some reviews. It really helps us find new fans. New episodes of Art Ed Radio will be released every Tuesday, and additional content can be found under the podcast tab on theartofed.com. Thanks for listening.